people want to angle themselves in this direction, they can. Usually for Teisho, I face the altar. This is the reason for this is that it's an expression of offering the talk to the Buddha. But I thought tonight, partly inspired by Grant's talk last week, but also just because of our subject, I wanted to talk about our relationship to the earth as we celebrated Earth Day the other day. And it seemed that if we were going to talk about relationship and especially about connections, that it would be good if we were facing towards each other and relating to each other, and also that we can have a chance for some discussion at the end. And we've found that when everybody just keeps their eyes down for the whole talk, then usually they don't have much to say by the time they get to end, and it could be helpful to talk at the end of this talk. I wanted to spend a Teisho on the subject of our relationship to the earth, but there wasn't time on our actual Earth Day celebrations, which were on Sunday. Some of you were here, but for those of you who weren't, we did three things. We sat for about an hour, then we did a ceremony of aid, a chanting service for the earth, really, making offerings and doing prostrations. We chanted the Kanon Sutra 108 times. And then after that, we went to this bit of wasteland that's at the back of the centre here that we have permission to rehabilitate. We're going to plant trees and other things there, create a little bit of forest in the city. Really, all we really needed to do for Earth Day was to sit. That would have been a full, complete expression of Earth Day. Of course, when we sit, what do we sit on? We sit on the earth. And we breathe the earth's air, this membrane that protects and surrounds our earth. And we couldn't sit if we weren't able to drink the earth's water and eat the earth's fruit, our food. So right, every time we sit, we're connecting with the earth, expressing our connection to the earth. And you could certainly say that every day is Earth Day. There's no day which isn't Earth Day. But we have an Earth Day, and the reason, as I mentioned on Sunday, the reason why we have it is because we need to remind ourselves of our unhealthy relationship to the earth, the damage we've been collectively perpetrating against the earth, in intensifying seriousness for quite some time. You could say going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But even before that, if you look at the history of our world, humans, when they came to a new place, would systematically kill off all the big fauna. The only place where that didn't happen was in Africa because the animals adapted and so survived. But everywhere else that human beings went, Australia, America, all over, all the animals were wiped out. New Zealand didn't have such great big fauna, but the moa were all wiped out. So we have one aspect of our relationship to this earth is that we're a predator, can be, and a lethal one. Of course, Earth Day isn't a traditional Buddhist holiday or celebration, but it's one that contains, in terms of how we do it, it contains some elements that we can certainly relate to the Dharma. You could say this ceremony is to help us wake up, and it's to help us wake up particularly to the three poisons as they express themselves in our unhealthy relationship with the earth. And these are, we usually talk about them as personal poisons, greed, hatred and ignorance, but of course they're also very much imbued in our institutions. Institutionalized greed is consumerism. Institutionalized hatred is our military-industrial complex, and our government's responses to terrorism. Institutionalized ignorance, well, we have the mass media for that, very skilled at disseminating distortion, untruth. We have to look hard to find reliable media. This Earth Day has celebrated for 45 years. This is the 45th. It started in 1970. And I think it's fair to say that the crisis has deepened since then. In spite of there having been many small victories by environmentalists, by conservationists, we are in really the whole planet is in deep trouble because of human activity. We're in this in the sixth period of mass extinction that has happened in the history of the planet, but the first one caused by human beings. They're now actually calling the age that we live in the Anthropocene, naming one of the geological ages out of we human beings, because we're having such profound effects on this earth that human actions are actually to be found, the evidence of our actions to be found in rocks and sediments now. What is the root? What is the root of this serious situation? Well, one way of understanding it is this almost religious worshipping by those in power of growth. And up to a point, growth is fine, but not when that growth outsteps resources. The resources on this planet, it's air and trees and land and water, aren't increasing. They go through cycles, yes, of increasing and decreasing, but they're finite. And it's very hard for us to get our minds around this. And we'll look a bit more into that later in the talk. One of the obvious reasons why we're not responding appropriately to this crisis we're in is because we're in denial, generally speaking. There are exceptions, and we're really, in a sense, we're blinded by our addiction to a certain kind of life. I mean, superficially you could say it's to fossil fuels, but really it's more to what we think those fuels give us. And one way to characterize that might be speed, ease, and stuff. We're enthralled and enchanted by these products of the earth, yes, but it's like we see them and miss the picture, miss the whole picture. A proof of addiction is when you do more and more extreme things to achieve a fix. And that being to the detriment of your life, your health, your relationships. And what we're doing now to extract fossil fuels is clearly just that. A classic example is fracking, this hydraulic fracturing, where water is pumped in between layers of rock to get the oil and gas out of those layers. And when we do this, we're taking water, something essential to our lives, and using it to extract these fuels, this oil and gas, something which is not essential to our life, and ruining that water in the process. You could say that eventually it will be purified by passing through layers and layers and layers of rock. Yes, maybe over thousands of years, but effectively, from our point of view, it's wasted, that water. And I just came across a figure, a kind of staggering figure, that only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh, drinkable water. And there are many, many other examples we could give just in the fossil fuel area. Deep sea drilling, which the government is inviting here, is much more risky, much more expensive. You see the results of an accident in the Gulf of Mexico when that oil burst and spewed oil into that oil well, spewed oil into the Gulf of Mexico for months. And tar sands extraction is another one, which takes massive, massive energy to turn those tar sands into oil. So there's a huge energy output to get that oil. Naomi Klein, in her book, This Changes Everything, which I'm drawing on somewhat for this talk, she gives a vivid example of this escalation of effort that is happening now with extraction. She cites the case of a passenger aeroplane, fairly small plane, which sank into the tarmac at an airport because it was so hot. This is a couple of years ago. The temperature was so high at this airport that the black tarmac melted, became semi-liquid, and the wheels of the plane sunk into it. And they got a kind of, one of those vehicles they have at the airports to come and tow the plane out, and they couldn't. And so then they had to get a bigger, gruntier, more fossil fuel burning, bigger vehicle to finally pull out this plane. Here's what she comments about this. She says, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge, or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with oil and coal were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because of the waterways that they draw on to cool their machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases both. Makes you wonder about the Gaia principle and all that is being done to maybe halt this whole crazy endeavour. Storms, droughts, floods and fires. Recently we've had the cyclone in Vanuatu, and there's still drought right now in Canterbury. Yet we don't, collectively we don't take note. We go on business as usual. And one of the things that Naomi Klein points out is that this is a crisis that is going to happen if we just keep on doing things as we've been doing them, if we stay in denial. Of course, the language that we use expresses this denial. We say global warming. It sounds even quite pleasant. We should be saying global overheating. Or we say climate change. Change makes it sound quite neutral. Or we talk about the environment. It's very abstract. We should be really seeing in our minds our soil, our air, our water, our fellow sentient beings, human and non-human. When we say the environment, it's as if our planet was separate from us, an object to our subject, or a background to our foreground, but it's not like that. We are dependent on this earth of ours. In Buddhism, there's a teaching on what shapes us, what makes us who we are. And there are three factors. One is, in fact, our environment. We're shaped by the place we are born and where we live, our ground, our whenua. The other two are karma and our mental discipline, or a lack of it. But this environment is a big part of who we are. Maori, when they introduce themselves, they'll talk about their mountain and the river, coast that are theirs, or which they belong to. This in this word whenua means both land and placenta. In Maori mythology, we're all born from Papatuanuku, from under the sea, and the lands that we see, the landforms that rise above the ocean, are actually placentas from her womb. They float like islands, but they come from the womb of Papatuanuku. Why are we so alienated from this earth, this mother of ours? It's really a question we have to ask ourselves. We can trace things in our culture. One thread that we can go back along is to the Bible, to Genesis, where it is said that God gives human beings dominion over nature to use as we see fit. So this is very pernicious to be seeing our relationship to the earth in terms of domination, and also anything else that we class as being earth, nature, matter, women, indigenous people, children. As soon as we separate, as soon as we put one over another, then we given a license to exploit. So our relationship to the earth, and this is another reason why it's important to look at it, we see that it's really about all our relationships. And that's where there can also be some hope in the crisis we're in. We'll come back to that. Could imagine that another reason for our denial might go back even further than Genesis. If you think about our human history, most of it beyond about the last 10,000 years, we lived in small bands in the wilderness, and a wilderness that was really vast and pervasive. It wasn't really until much more recently that there was such a thing as civilization. Pockets of it, but still surrounded. Even in the Middle Ages, then there was this real, if you look at the literature and the art, there was this real demarcation of what was a civilized area and what was untamed, wilderness. And in that wilderness there were wolves and other threatening things to be kept at bay. And maybe we still have that kind of mentality somewhere deep in our psyche, even though it's the other way around now. In many parts of the earth, the wilderness are the pockets, and they're often dwindling pockets, surrounded by human construction. It's possible for somebody to go through their whole life without any exposure to real wilderness, or even less pristine areas, which are still not totally human dominated. And without that experience, without that being affected by those areas, you can just be indifferent. They're not even real for a person. It could just inspire fear, or maybe just numbness, disregard, or sentimentality. Think of all the animals doing crazy things on Facebook. That may be somebody's total experience of the non-human. So I wonder if there isn't a kind of immaturity in us, we human beings, where we're still somehow, somewhere in our minds, thinking that this earth of ours is limitless, endlessly resilient, able to put up with whatever we throw at it. A little bit like we might have once upon a time imagined our parents to be, kind of superhuman, big, capable. So we're really faced with this situation of having to grow up, of having to come to a more mature understanding of our earth. But having said that, many indigenous peoples have a much more sophisticated relationship to the earth than we modern people do. So it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from indigenous cultures. And I think we're very lucky to be in partnership here with Tangata Whenua. There are many instances of battles being fought here in New Zealand. Petrobras is one off the coast of the East Cape, where the local tribes were very strongly involved in discouraging that deep sea oil drilling. Another factor may be that old saying, out of sight, out of mind. So many of the ways that we're damaging our earth that we don't directly see. We don't see the CO2 in the atmosphere. We don't see the plastic filling up the oceans. We throw things away and think that there is some place that is away, when there's no away, there's only here. So one of the questions that Naomi Klein poses in her book is, what if we were to turn all of this around and see the crisis we're in, the turning point we're at as human beings, and see it as an opportunity. An opportunity to really change our relationship to our world, galvanize us as human beings to try and do things differently, to try and create societies which are fairer, safer in all kinds of ways, where we share resources more. At a conference, Klein meets a Bolivian politician who can see the possibilities if people were to really acknowledge what was going on. She's a diplomat and I think a member of parliament, and she points out that Bolivians have done nothing to cause the crisis, and yet they're suffering a lot because they depend on their glaciers for their water, and the glaciers are disappearing. And she imagines a world in which everybody creates a kind of Marshall Plan for the planet and pours investment into developing technologies for very poor countries like Bolivia, really marshalling all human energy to make changes, to mitigate climate change, because it's too late now to stop it. It's here. We're in the crisis. And we can see this from a practice point of view, that the way in which sometimes we see our unconsciousness, we see the ways in which we've hurt ourselves and others, and that can be a really strong motivating factor. Of course, the forces we're up against are huge. All the vested interests, the people in power who don't want things to change, who are in the pay of people who are making huge amounts of money out of this extreme extraction that is happening right now. But it could be something hopeful. But to make it into that something, we have to face what's going on. We have to really understand what the consequences are of keeping on pouring CO2 into the atmosphere. To look at how we can make stronger communities locally, to plant trees, to when we're making a big decision, to look into what its effects might be. To grow food in less damaging ways. There are many aspects to this. One of the things that's important for us who meditate to be aware of is, because we're probably maybe more introverts in Zen centers than there are in the general population, is that just sitting and maybe doing other things in our lives which are supportive of a different way, they're important, but if we just stop there, it may not be enough. Of course, we can't say there's just one way to respond. Everybody's got to sense, find out by just looking inside what is appropriate for them. But at least a good proportion of us need to get out and communicate with others, not just sit and use the farmer market. Go to buy from the farmer's market, as Naomi Klein says. She says personal carbon virtue is not enough. But if we are going to start communicating with others, then we have to be able to do it in a way that is non-violent. Brings us back to non-violent communication. If it has to be a way of communicating that doesn't cause more problems, add to the problems. So how can we be challenging and constructive at the same time? One way that we can draw on from our Buddhist understanding is that that people in power are suffering too. I saw a photograph in the business section of the Herald this weekend of the richest man in New Zealand, and I was struck by how sad he looked. The divestment movement is a really strong one, encouraging institutions to get out of investing in fossil fuel extraction. Unless that money comes out and goes elsewhere, there won't be alternatives. It's not that really that this movement is going to stop that investment, because there's probably always going to be others who will invest in it. But it's sending a message about that industry, changing people's attitudes to it, just the way that attitudes towards tobacco companies were changed. There are little things that we can do that make a difference, like checking out our KiwiSaver scheme to see if it invests in fossil fuels. Writing to your bank, writing to your university. It's a campaign that's on right now. Universities doing all this research that brings up evidence of the problems of global warming, but still putting money into oil and gas. Getting involved in local protection is another one. All over the world, local communities are coming together when they're threatened by extreme extractive methods or other things. They come to these campaigns out of love for that particular river or coastline. One thing that really needs to be avoided above all is just keeping on as usual, because the results of that we know will be quite disastrous in terms of the chain reactions that may be set off, may already be being set off, as we've had some 20 years of negotiations and emissions keep going up. It has to change. But even if we don't manage to change it, the kinds of things that we can do right now to respond to the crisis won't be lost if there isn't change. Creating stronger communities, greater awareness, sharing more equitably across our communities and between countries. It would be wrong to imagine that there won't need to be sacrifices in a real proper response to these challenges, changing this unhealthy addiction. I mentioned earlier what we might be attached to in terms of what we think we might be getting from fuels. Speed, ease, and stuff. Speed is a big one, I think, for us. We try to fit so much into our day, and part of that is zipping around in our cars. What if we were just okay with fitting less in, going to fewer places? Or going to those places not encased in metal. Lately I've been trying to catch the bus more, and what I discover is that my day becomes more spacious. It feels less rushed. We do have to give up some ease. And I'm thinking here of the hard work that we need to do. We have to show up in our, not only in our zazen and our awareness of what's going on in any given moment, but for some of us, we may need to show up at meetings, write letters, do research, create community through getting together. It all involves effort. We have to also loosen our grip on stuff, this mentality of consumption and growth. We have to move from that to one of more of a steady state, a balance. Move from an acquisitional mentality to a dana mentality. But what would happen if we did that? Wouldn't we find all kinds of riches? Wouldn't we feel more joy? Freedom? The Metta Sutta, I just came across a copy of it. This is the San Francisco Zen Center version of it. And it reads like this. This is what should be accomplished by one who is wise, who seeks the good and has attained peace. Let one be strenuous, upright and sincere, without pride, easily contented and joyous. Let one not be submerged by the things of the world. Let one not take upon oneself the burden of riches. Let one's senses be controlled. Let one be wise, but not puffed up. Let one not desire great possessions, even for one's family. Let one do nothing that is mean or that the wise would reprove. These are all expressions of love and help to open us to love. A little bit later, even as a mother at the risk of her life watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all living things, suffusing love over the entire world, above, below, and all around, without limit. So let one cultivate an infinite goodwill toward the whole world. If we can really respond and act out of this motivation of selfless love rather than bewitched attachment, then we'll be able to die without regrets. Really don't know what the outcome of this crisis will be. Change is inevitable. The change is happening. The question is whether we'll rise to the occasion, whether human beings will wake up to what is going on, or whether the change will be catastrophic, and with all the human reactions that would come with that. We can already see them. We can see them in the way the governments use people's fear to create more oppressive laws in different ways. Another teaching that can be very helpful here is seeing into the insubstantiality of the things of this earth. Seeing it as we appreciate a glass of water, a meal, a breeze, tree. Even as we see something being degraded or destroyed, there's a verse in the Mumonkan. You cannot describe it, you cannot picture it, you can never praise it fully. Stop all your groping and manoeuvring. There is nowhere to hide your true self. When the world is annihilated, it remains indestructible. What is it that is to be found even in the destruction, even when the world is ending? What is that? I'll stop here and recite the 4 vows. No, we won't. We'll have some discussion first and then we'll recite the 4 vows. If anybody wants to comment.
I would like to add that this crisis is by the beginning in terms of how many violent conflicts have an environmental aspect to them, but this is very often not reported. For example, in Indonesia, there has been a lot of local ethnic violence, and it was very often where foreign investors had a mining operation, and the pressure on the resources was in the background, but it just doesn't get into the news, and in spite of this denial.
Yeah.
And same with violence in Niger Delta in Nigeria. I could list many places, but the Western world just doesn't come to this.
Or food, problems in Africa around food. The one interesting fact that I found a few years ago was that the biggest single buyer of gasoline in the world is the US military.
Many things that you spoke about that really landed with me. In particular, a couple of examples came to point. I remember when the gas prices were going up in my business, a number of people started carpooling. And there was actually some action around it, and it was forced because of the conditions made it happen. And as soon as the gas prices went down, the whole thing disappeared again.
Yeah.
It was just interesting to see that. And what I learned from that was the conditions are really quite important around what the outcomes are. And the other thing that landed quite heavily for me was when I was involved in community work around stuff like you said, that things that weren't seen, the sewage plant, the dumping of the sediment into the ocean. And what really triggered some community spirit was actually some emotion around it.
Yes.
The concepts weren't enough.
Yeah.
The ideas weren't enough. They had to get some feeling
Yeah.
around it. And to generate that was really important.
I think sometimes we can hear about not being attached and think that we should just be indifferent to all these different things that are happening. But really, it's the blind passions that we need to avoid, not a kind of healthy sense of kaitiakitanga, of being guardians, of being the voice. You know, the bottom of the sea doesn't have a voice. The sea's voice has to be us. Well, no one speaks. At least at meetings. You could say the sea speaks in other ways, but it doesn't get up at meetings. So it is that thing of some passion, some real care for some for a particular place or environment. Use that word.
And going on from that, Naomi Klein, she talks about cool white dudes who are in power, and basically it's the rich and the wealthy who are controlling global markets, who are in political power, who've got so much invested in the whole fossil fuel industry that they're not going to change, and they're cool because for a certain amount of population, they're rich, they're wealthy, they're in power, so they seem cool. But the other side of the coolness is they actually lack empathy. They're cold, they lack empathy, and at the moment, they're also making plans to continue on to hold on to power and to hold on to fossil fuels for as long as they can, at the expense of poorer countries, at the expense of refugees. You can see this in Europe at the moment, like virtually turning a blind eye to what's happening with refugees from Libya. It's this coldness that's coming in that's going to intensify too, that we have to work against. That people in power, they're going to say, oh, it's compassion fatigue. But really, we don't care about those others. What we care about is our own wealth, our own power. And if poor countries or islands go underwater, so be it, as long as we can cling on to power. And it's that separation, which is always is the root of ignorance, is seeing us and them. Is the real problem. So, so we need some passion, we need empathy with others, empathy with the earth.
I have to say, I see something else happening here apart from that bigger picture. Just from my own personal experience, I go and buy a lifestyle block up north. I live in a community. We have our own water, and I can see the actual knowledge around that and the energy that has to bring that in, and we meet, we've got a community going. But in true honesty, I don't want to live up there right now. I've got all the stimulation happening around here, things are happening for me, and I've got the ability to do other stuff and go here and go there and be effective, what I call effective. So I'm no different to anybody else. I'm just like pretending. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got this thing up there, but I'm still just doing exactly what I've ever done. Okay, I've made some changes, but at the end of the day, that stimulation is a big thing for people. Who could go on the land and live up there in a boring old place without stimulation? I don't think people are ready for it. I really don't. I'm one of them.
Well, there is a lot of stuff about actually being in cities is in some ways more effective when things start to run down, or that this whole transition towns movement is about making the cities work better. Yeah, maybe you could say something about that. So.
Well, yeah, I guess we have this tendency to want to go away from the cities and get out in nature and enjoy all that, but we do need to focus energy on making our cities more human places to live, because they're so dominated by things like motorways to get things, that would have been designed by engineers rather than people thinking about traffic flow, rather than thinking about people inhabiting a space and interacting with it. So we really need to work on our cities.
Well, you can say they're designed by engineers, but they're designed by politicians and bean counters, because engineers can design a whole lot of things.
Yeah. If
the conditions are right.
Yeah.
So I don't like putting the blame on engineers.
Well, I guess, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I guess it's the whole mindset, and yeah. But what I mean, let me rephrase that then. Just people. Yeah, we're designing cities with certain, like that speed thing, and all those things, certain kind of goals in mind, rather than remembering that cities are meant to be communities and so on. I actually just went to on Sunday after Earth Day. On the way home, I went to a thing called a food swap in Mount Eden. And
food swap.
A food swap. And it was basically a bunch of people who belong to different cooperatives, like buying wholesale whole food cooperatives, and they grow their own food, and some people buy raw milk and make their own cheese, and they're bringing it along once a month and swapping things, exchanging things, and it's illegal to sell things in this way. So you could buy a bean for $1, and you could buy 10 beans for $10 or whatever, and then you use them to do a little as your currency during this food swap, and then you for your rhubarb or whatever, and then you. It was quite fun. I really enjoyed it. Again, these people that are really wanting to create more of a sense of a local community within the city. It was good fun.
Cities, well, not perhaps here, but in the Europe area, bringing up children have been brought up in cities completely divorced from. 1971 it was. I was on a visit to the UK in Liverpool, and a friend of mine and his wife were running sort of Cub Scout thing, and they had a camp. They were taking some of these boys, about 10 and 11-year-old boys, to North Wales. So they asked me would I help them out, go along. So I went along to this camp it's a week's camp, and some of these boys, they went off and they went charging through the farmer's hay paddock. And of course the farmer was pretty irate and came down, and we got these boys together, what are you doing? But they just didn't understand. They said, but that's just grass that grows in your pavements at home, and you get rid of it. It's useless. They just had no conception that the grass was being used as food for the animals. In fact, they didn't even know about how cows were milked or what happens. So actually, it was quite good because we got the farmer talking to them, and he sort of calmed down, and he decided he took these boys off and went, took them around his farm and showed them all the things that were going on. But those boys were brought. It's come from the slum area in Liverpool, which was just nothing. But they were being brought up completely and utterly. Yeah. Divorced from reality of nature.
Yeah.
This really resonates with me because I got the experience of both living in nature as a child. I spent a lot of time outdoors and far away from the city and in a small village, and then there was a move to a city, not as big as Auckland, but still. And the difference is that in nature things are not made for you, they are not designed to be useful or comfortable for you, and it builds a kind of humility, and it just creates a different attitude. And because many people at that time moved to the city, and there was a change in culture that you could observe, because you think that culture is something very stable that doesn't change quickly, but actually a physical environment can really shape your culture quite quickly, and it was not to the better.
I heard about a woman who is teaching mindfulness, that she was encountering children in primary school who had had 2 hours of screen time before they got to school. And so they were being shaped by clicking on screens for 2 hours before they even got to school.
This shows you the bosses, the politicians are stuffing it up. America, there's a bill going through Congress they reckon will go through about the Environmental Protection Agency, and the bill is that scientists who work on climate will not be allowed to be on or work for the Environmental Protection Committee because they have a conflict of interest. But representatives of the oil industry will be allowed on and encouraged to be on because they've got an interest in it. Apparently Obama has said that this bill will definitely go through, they reckon, But he said he's going to veto it, so at least there's one thing. But I mean, the fact that of the whole, how many men are in Congress, you know, that all those top people are actually pushing through a bill like that.
I think it proves Richard's point about vested interests.
And there's a great thing that he gave in the Young Climate book. It's, although there are a lot of climate deniers, they're quite clever too. They're actually preparing for the worst. They've got their own scenarios they're working on, and one of these ultra-rich people in the States are developing these gated communities, and part of the package, if you buy in, it's like sort of survivalists, high-class survivalists, you'll get your own private farming you'll have access to put out fires. So that's one of the things they're offering is your private farming will be available in case sort of wildfires break out.
Okay, I think we'll stop now and do the 4 vows.